Hi, this is Mark from ITCU Solutions, and today I'm going to show you how to configure an HPE Office Connect switch 1820. This is a pretty good switch if you just need a simple switch that has 12 PoE ports. It does have a couple negatives. It doesn't have a command line, so it can take a little bit longer to configure. And also, it does not have a built-in access control list to protect your management. That could be a problem with auditors, or if you have other security concerns. It's not a problem for what I do because I tend to hook this straight off of a router, so I can run the access control list right off of the router. So the first thing you need to do to configure one of these is you need to open up a web browser and go to 192.168.1.1, and that will bring up this management interface, and the default password is just admin, and there's no login. And so that will bring you right into your dashboard where you can just give it a system name. I'm just going to use test switch and lab, and I'll apply that. The next thing you could do is, if you go to the Get Connected, this will have your management settings, the IP for the switch, and also your VLAN ID. I'm not going to use VLAN 1 for my ID, so I'm going to skip doing anything here at this point because I need to actually go set up my VLANs. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create 3 VLANs. In my case, I'm going to use this switch for a client that does have VoIP phones. And so I'm going to set up 3 VLANs. I'm going to set up a VLAN 2 for my data traffic, a VLAN 3 for my voice, and a VLAN 4 for management. So let's do that real quick. Okay, so and then I'm also going to add a VLAN 10 just for management. And I'll go in and label those real quickly so I don't forget what they are. So that's going to be my data VLAN. This will be the voice. And 10 is going to be just the management VLAN. Now the next step is I'm going to just put the ports on these VLANs. And so the very first thing I'm going to do is apply my data VLANs. Now right now the VLAN is excluded. It's not on these physical interfaces. So I'm just going to select the first 10 of them. And because it's my data VLAN, I'm going to make them all untagged. This is basically just your PVID. So this is looking at traffic coming into the switch. So if it comes into the switch as untagged, it's going to be directed into VLAN 2. Or in this case, if it leaves the switch, if it's coming from VLAN 2, it will also be stripped and sent out untagged to whatever's out there. For the first 10 ports, since I have 12 PoE ports up here on this half, I'm also going to add a voice VLAN to the first 10. But in this case, and see they're excluded, I'm going to add them as tagged, because the phones that we place out there will pull a VLAN ID from the DHCP pool, so they can immediately be dumped into this VLAN. And one other point about that is this switch does support Lldp over here, link level discovery protocol, which a lot of phones can use, like Polycom and a few others. That is not possible. The Lldp, you can't set voice ports up on these cheaper HPE switches, so it's not possible to utilize Lldp on these. So later on, I'll actually go disable LLDP, because many phones, if they actually sense LLDP is running on those ports, you won't be able to get the VLAN information from the DHCP. But let's continue to configure the rest of these ports. So let's move on to the next 10. And I'm just going to configure all 10 of these with the data port untagged. Okay. But only the first two. Whoops. I have to go up here first. But I'm only going to add the first two to the voice VLAN, and that's because after 13 they're no longer PoE ports. Okay. And the other thing you'll notice is the minute you throw in an untagged port on these, they will be removed from VLAN 1 because that was the old untagged port. And you can't have multiple untagged ports. Untagged VLANs, because obviously the switch wouldn't know which VLAN to send it to, so it automatically removes them all out of VLAN 1. Okay, so my first 20 ports are all set up correctly. And let's just do it this way. And for now, I'm just going to ignore port 21, 22, and 23. I'm going to set my port 24 up as a trunk. So in this case, all these ports have to be set up as as tagged, excuse me, to be a trunk. So I'm just going to set 1 up to be tagged. I'm going to set 2 up to be tagged. I need 3 to be tagged. And I also need 10 to be tagged. Okay. So now I just set up my trunk. I have a trunk on my Cisco switch on the other side. So that should be good to go once we get going. I have to leave. I'm plugged into VLAN 23 right now, so I actually do need one on VLAN 1 because we haven't changed the management VLAN yet, and I wouldn't be able to manage the switch without it. So I'm just going to leave those as is. In fact, I might change port 22 here just to put him on the management VLAN for now, in case I have a problem. Okay, so we're good to go. We have our VLANs created and we have them assigned to the proper physical ports. And if you want to go and look, you can go see that all the data ports, the untagged VLANs here, are all showing up. So that's the PVID number. It's not showing you the actual tagged VLANs, but it is showing you what it's going to do with the untagged traffic when it comes in. So the next step in configuring these is we're just going to set up the network. And I'm going to move this over to my VLAN 10, so I need to give it a different IP address. I'm going to use static. Okay. And my VLAN 10 is in the 10 network. So we're going to call it 34. Subnet mask is good. Gateway 10.10.1. That's all good. I'm not going to worry about my session timeout. I am also going to change my VLAN. Well, I'll tell you what, let's not do that yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply this, and then I'm going to reconnect in on the 10.10.34 network. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to pause the video after I apply this because I'm going to lose connectivity, and I'll pause the video until I get back into the screen. Okay, so I just basically changed the IP address on my NIC card, so I'm just logging back in. Now I'm still on that VLAN ID 1, so the next step is sometime I have trouble with this, changing this and the VLAN ID at the same time and hitting apply. So the reason I did that is it's common for me to have a problem here doing them both at once. So okay, so I have the IP up here, and then I have the VLAN ID set to 10. So I'm just going to apply this, and this will also cut me off because I'm physically not in the right port. Okay. Should bring me right back up. Okay. So now we should all have everything set up in the correct VLAN. I'm not going to worry about my community string for now. You can change that if you're using SNMP. So I'm going to apply all this. We're in pretty good shape now. That's probably the hardest part of this whole thing. So I can go back to my VLAN membership, or I'm not going to worry about that actually. So basically our VLAN is set up, our management here is configured correctly. We got our management on our a different ID, a different VLAN ID, and the IP changed. The next thing I always do is I'm going to go in and I just change my clock. So I change it to standard 12 hour. I'm also going to use SMTP, so we're going to go onto the time tab and we're going to enable that. Okay. And in my case, I'm just going to actually hit my router. If you have a time server, you can put in the IP address for that. Okay, so we should be good here. And then also I'm going to go in and select my time zone. And I'm in Mountain Standard Time. You can give it an acronym if you want. And then also, since I'm in the United States, it's very easy just to hit US. It'll set up recurring and everything for you. Okay, so that's all done. So we have our management all set up, our system time, we've named everything, we've got our VLAN set up. The switching is just for your physical port configurations. This would be if you wanted to disable ports and things like that. In this case, we don't have to worry about it. I don't need to set up any span ports. I don't need jumbo frames or flow control. I'm not going to set up spanning tree. I'm not going to turn it on in this case because the switches I'm setting up go directly to a router. But if you do have a bunch of switches that you're interconnecting through, especially if they have multiple uplinks, you might want to turn on spanning tree, especially if you aren't using the trunks down here, the port channel, to handle that redundancy. So I'm not going to worry about loop protection or IGMP snooping either, because I'm not going to worry about spanning tree. And the trunks, these aren't trunks in the Cisco sense. These are actually all port channels. So it's the idea is you got 8 of them, so you can aggregate 2 of your ports, just like you would with port channel. As you can see, they even call them port channel. I'm not going to do this in this case. The one thing I am going to do, since I'm going to use phones on my first 12 ports, and because the LLDP on this, the link level discovery protocol, will screw up my phones because they'll assume that they can pull the configuration for the VLAN down from LLDP. That isn't true on these because I can't set a voice VLAN. So I am going to go in and I'm just going to disable these guys. So I'm going to turn all this off because I do not want it doing that, because it will definitely mess up any phones you have. Now you don't need it on just where you're going to plug in your computers, but it's also not going to hurt anything, so I'm not going to worry about it. You do want it between your switches. Okay. In fact, right now, if the Cisco device should be showing up in LLDP, and it is, because I turned off CDP and I turned off LLDP. So that's good. It is picking that up through my trunk port. So, and that's what you want it for. And since I'm not going to worry about the enhanced LLDP down here either. The power over the Ethernet, this is more of a you know, if you want to set, you know, what the wattage is. I'm just going to use dynamic. I've never had any problems with the power differences between cameras or phones. It's the auto is always, the dynamic has always worked. But if you do want to go manually set those, you can. I've never felt the need for it. You can also schedule it to turn off the power to the ports if you want. Again, my clients all have variable hours, so there's no reason to do that. On the security front, on the advanced, I've had more problems setting these things than I think it's worth. Plus, these type of attacks internally aren't generally a problem. But the one thing you do need to set up is the secure connection. If you don't want to use HTTP, which is what we're using right now, you can't go in and just enable this. You can't disable and enable this because currently there's no, you can see the certificate status is absent. So in order to generate a certificate, you could upload one. But if you just want to use the free certificate, you can just generate one. And we'll give that a second. That'll create a certificate, and that will allow us to use HTTPS on this. Give it just a second here. It's usually pretty quick. Okay, so certificate's there. So we can, that will allow us to enable HTTPS mode and disable the HTTP mode. And I'll apply that. And so now when I connect up here, I should get that certificate error. Also, I'm not going to worry about the green features. This is just the ability to shut power down to your ports. And for diagnostic, the log is pretty good. Let's see, it's 10.10.10.34. Okay. It's because we need the certificate now. Okay. So it kicked us out for a second. So I'm not going to worry too much about the green features. Like I said, that's the shutting power down. For your diagnostic, it has a pretty good log. This is where you can factory default your switch or reboot your switch, and it does have ping tests. And I'll show you the log real quick because it's pretty decent. It's a pretty decent log, very similar to a Cisco log. You do have a MAC table. You can look at your MAC table here as well. So it is relatively useful. And this is where the next thing you need to do is create a whatever username you want to use. I'll leave mine as admin, but then you want to put in, you know, some type of password. Of course, my current password is nothing. Oh, it's gonna be 8. Okay, so you're gonna have to put in a new password, probably a new username too, and the last thing I just want to go over real quick is you do have a pretty good backup. You can either use a TFTP client like Pumpkin or something, or you can just back up your files through HTTP on whatever machine you're on. You can back up a file, and then you can also come back and reload it as your secondary image if you have an older image you want to go back to. And what this is down here, it's telling you next time you reboot which image you want to bring up. So in theory, you could back up an image, you know, bring it back up a little while later, especially if it's older or has something about it that's different, or it's the same or whatever, that you could boot it if you want to. And it is a good idea to use this backup manager. It does seem to work fairly well. I have had problems with it, but generally it works pretty well. And this is pretty much all you have to do with these. The big thing is just knowing how to set up the VLANs and membership, and knowing to turn off your Lldp if you're using phones, and just having a sequence of events that will let you go change this without locking yourself out. And that's all there really is to the these cheaper Layer 2 Office Connects. Like I said, Cisco's getting more and more expensive, so we're trying to find other solutions for our clients. And I probably wouldn't use this just out on the LAN because it doesn't have its own access control list, although you could use the management interface as an out-of-band management, especially if you're going to run separate wires, or just manage it through the trunk interface. But we generally manage it to the trunk interface, so we're forced to, and in a separate VLANs, we're forced to go through an ACL on our router. And that seems to work fine, and I think that satisfies all the auditors. So I hope this has been useful, and if anyone has any questions, you can comment below and I would try to answer them. Have a great day.